But in this video, we're going to talk about solving higher powered inequalities. So quadratics and cubes, that's probably as high as we'll go. Here's some examples of what the problems might look like that we're going to cover in here. So here's the first problem we'll do. And if you notice, I have an x squared and I have an x. So even though they're both x's, one's x squared, one's x, they're not like terms. You can't add them together. We would not be able to get everything down to just a single x like we did in the last one. So that's why we have to do it some other way. So we're going to work with this 0. Because this is a 0 over here, greater than 0 means it's a positive number. And if it were less than 0, that would mean it's a negative number. And we can do a lot with positives and negatives because we know a lot of things about multiplying positives or negatives. So what we need to do here is factor. So if we factor this, and I'd be looking for two numbers that multiply to be -10 and up to be 3. So that would be 5 and -2. So I can look at where this actually equals 0, right? So if I look on the number line at -5, if I plugged in -5, I would get a 0 right here, and it'd be 0 times, who cares, whatever it is, it's going to still equal 0, right? Since we have a greater than or equal to, it's okay if it equals 0, so I want to use that point. That is going to be one of my points. So I'm just going to color in the circle here. Kind of hard to tell if it's colored in. Okay, now this one is 0 at 2. Okay, and it's okay if it were equal to 2. I would want to use that, right? So I will go ahead and color that in. Now, these 2 points, -5 and 2, are really important because they're the only place that this will change signs. Right? Anything less than -5 will keep this as a negative. Okay? So I want to just look at these intervals. So first, I'll look at this interval right here from -infinity to -5. And I want to figure out, is this interval positive or negative? Because we know it's all one or the other. If one point is positive, they're all going to be positive. If one point is negative, they're all going to be negative. So I want to just pick a point in that interval and plug it in here and see what the answer will be, right? So let's pick -6. So if I put -6 into this, I get -6 plus 5 is going to be -1. I don't really care if it's negative, what the number is. I just care that it's negative, right? So this is a negative number. Alright, so this is a negative number, and if I put -6 into the second one here, that would be -8, so that's a negative number. So I have a negative times a negative gives me a positive. So this little interval here, everything in there is positive. Goes all the way up to right here. Okay? Alright, now let's look at the next interval. Everything between here. Right? So let's pick a number between -5 and 2. Let's say 0. 0 is a pretty convenient number. So if I plug 0 into x plus 5, I get 5, and that's a positive number. And if I plug 0 into x minus 2, I get negative 2, so that's a negative number. So when I take a positive times a negative, the answer is a negative. And everything in between these two intervals gives us a negative. Okay, so now let's look at this last interval and look for a number bigger than 2. So let's pick maybe 5. So 5 plus 5 is 10, that's a positive number. 5 minus 2 is 3, that's a positive number. Positive times a positive is a positive. So that interval is also positive. Alright, so now I come back here and look at my original problem, and you notice that it's greater than 0, so that means I want positives. So I want to include this interval, and I want to include this interval, right, in my answer. Okay, so when I write my answer, I would start over here at negative infinity, and that will be my first one. So I go negative infinity up to negative 5, and I included negative 5, you remember. And then I use a U, it means union, and then means we're going to use both of these parts for our answer. I include 2, and it goes up to infinity. Okay, so there's my answer. Okay, so here's the quadratic, but it's a little bit different. And so I hope you can notice what the difference is, because the difference is this number right here. It's not 0. Now, in order for us to use the whole positive negative thing, this has got to be a 0. So I can't do the factoring and everything yet. I have to make that a 0. So I'll go ahead and subtract 3 from both sides. It's equal to 0. And now I have this quadratic again, and I need to factor. So there are lots of different ways to factor this thing. I'm going to do it by grouping. Remember, we would look for multiply the first and the last. We get negative 6. I'd be looking for two numbers that multiply to be negative 6, but they add up to be a 1 from this middle number. So that would be a 3 and a negative 2. So I'll rewrite the middle number as 3x minus 2x. Everything else stays the same. Then I factor by grouping. So I pull the common factors out of this, which gives me a 2x plus 3. I pull the common factors out of here, which is just a negative 1, and I get 2x plus 3. That's 3. So I pull out 2x plus 3, and I have x minus 1, and that's what it is factored. So that was less than or equal to 0. So now we go ahead and we look at our number line. Well, this is equal to 0 at negative 3/2. And this is equal to 0 at 1. So if you didn't see that without the work, then go off to the side somewhere and just set it equal to 0 and solve it. Okay, an easy problem to solve once you know what you're doing. This pen is not working very well. Okay, anyway, now we're going to check. We're going to check the different intervals. And you notice that this was a less than or equal to, so we are going to use the endpoints, both of them. Right. So first I'll check this first interval. Let's pick a number less than -3/2. And let's just pick, you can go way less than you know for sure, right? So say like -10. Well, when I plug -10 into here, I get -20 plus 3. Anyway, it's negative, right? It's a negative number. I plug -10 in here, I get another negative number. Negative times a negative gives me a positive. Okay, now I want to look at the middle one. Looks like 0 falls in that interval. That'd be good. So 0 in here is 3. That's a positive. 0 in here is -1. That's a negative. Positive times a negative is a negative. So the middle section gives us all negatives. Look at the last section, and we pick a number bigger than 1, say like 2. So if I plug 2 into the first one, I get 4 plus 3 is 7. That's positive. And 2 in here gives me 1. That's positive. Positive times positive is positive. So I've checked all the different intervals. Now remember that we have a less than. So this time we're just looking for where it's negative. So it would be this interval right here is the only place where it's negative. So to write this in interval notation, I'm including -3/2. I'm including 1, and that's the answer. Right? That's how you should be writing your answer. Briefly, we'll just look at this problem. It has a higher degree, but it's already factored. So we can really do anything that we can factor. We can do this with, right? We notice that, if we look at the number line, I'd be looking at -2, +5, +2. It's not an equal to, it's just less than, so I would leave an open circle for each of those because I don't want to use the influence. Then I would start checking. So we try a -3. So this one would be negative, this one would be negative, this would be negative. When I multiply 3 negatives together, I get a negative. Right? Look at the second one. With 0 would work. Then I have a positive, I have a negative, and a negative. I have 2 negatives and a positive, so that when I multiply it together gives me a positive. Between 2 and 5, I might look at 3. This would still be positive. That would still be negative. This would be positive. That gives me a negative because I have 1 negative. Bigger than 5 gives me positive, positive, positive. Alright, I'm looking for its negative. So it's going to include this and this. I would write my answer from -infinity to -2. Don't include it. Union means I've got 2 parts to my answer. From 2 to 5, don't include it. And that would be your answer. Okay, here's the quiz question for 1.6b. X squared minus 8 greater than or equal to 2x. Write that down, figure it out, go into Canvas and enter it into that quiz when you have it all figured out.